How would you like to have 7.5 weeks of joyful vacation with God and your family every year? You can. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Shelley Quinn, and we're so glad that you're joining us no matter where you are around the world, and if you're listening by radio or by internet or if you're watching us on television. Thank you for joining Issues and Answers. Today's going to be an exciting day because we're going to be talking about how to have a 7.5-week vacation with God. One of my favorite verses is Isaiah 30:15. I used to consider this my life verse. Here's the Lord speaking, and he says, "In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength." And actually I look at that verse now and I realize it's a call to come to God, rest in Him on His Sabbath day. And that is how you can have 52 days out of the year, that's 7.5 weeks, of vacation with God. And if we look at it as a very special time, a vacation time that will be joyful, then this is something that we should all be looking forward to week by week. Help me to welcome, if you will, our very special guest. She is a PhD and an author. She's also the assistant director for the Sabbath School and Personal Ministries of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the General Conference, and May Ellen Cologne. May Ellen, that's just a mouthful for me to say, but we're so glad that you've returned.
So glad to be back.
Now, let me set this up quickly because we really want to get into our topic today, but I just want to let people know a little bit about who you are. You grew up and married a pastor. You grew up in an Adventist environment. Your father was not, but your mother was. You married a pastor. You met in college. You were missionaries in Africa and Russia for 9 years, and now you're at the General Conference. But you, because of your son and just because of the different cultural experiences that you had and seeing how people kept the Sabbath, making the Sabbath a joyful celebration really became a passion of yours, and knowing how to find the biblical principles to how to observe the Sabbath in such a way that you'd find joy and the Lord would find joy and the family would find joy. And you've written a book, From Sundown to Sundown, How to Keep the Sabbath and Enjoy It. This book's available at the ABCs or also at Amazon.com. But now what we want to do today, you have this statement that you said that the Sabbath is a vacation with God and with His family, joyful rest. Let's unpack that. You have certain principles that you have pulled from the Bible to talk about the vacation. Let's get into those principles.
Okay. Well, first of all, I love vacations.
Amen.
And when I heard that, at the General Conference, that I finally had worked my way up to 4 weeks a year, I thought, wow. Then when I discovered that I have actually 7.5 weeks of vacation that I had thought about with God, that was even more of a big deal. And so every vacation, though, involves certain things, and one of them is preparation. So that actually is the first principle that under the vacation part of that statement that I'd like to just share. And in the book, it's more explained. But basically, that means preparing for this special day so we can enjoy its benefits. Even God, we talked about the last time about God. We reflect different characteristics of God when we live the Sabbath. And even God is a preparer. He prepared the earth and for the people, before he made the people.
He prepared the garden. He made it very special.
And then the Sabbath came, the culmination. Of course, He's preparing a place for us, and the earth made new.
Amen.
And so He's a preparer. So when we can emulate Him by following that principle of His existence, His life.
Okay, so principle number 1, in preparation, there's some scriptures for that.
Yeah.
Hebrews 4:11, Exodus 16:28 through 30, and Luke 23:54 through 56 to talk about the preparation. Now, when you are talking about preparation for the Sabbath, we're going to be talking about preparation to make the Sabbath special.
As the Israelites did in Exodus 16, I'm just taking one of the 3. They had some definite preparation. You know, they had to get the manna prepared before Sabbath, and there was some definite intentionality there.
They had to get their fire built because that was a big chore back then.
Yes, and so forth. So the principle of preparation is, you'll see that thread running through Scripture in various stories.
Okay. So what are some of the things that you do in your family to prepare for the Sabbath?
Well, when I was, well, let's see, this must have been in Africa when our little girl, Sarah, was in 1st grade. She made a clock for Bible class one day, and I still have this same clock. It has survived many years, and says Sabbath begins at, and has hands, it's hard to see them, that move. And we still have that on our refrigerator and have had it for years now. And so just the idea that there's a definite time that we're aiming towards. It's sort of like taking a vacation. You know you need to be at the airport at a certain time to take off. Well, we're going to take off on Shalom Airlines to Sabbath Land.
I like that.
And we need to be there, we need to be ready for the departure to get the full benefit of this experience. And so there's a time element there. There's intentionality. And also, we have, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you also, my favorite thing that you had was the little schedule that you put up on your...
Yes, I do. We do have that, that we started that when we were in Africa, when the other missionaries was doing it with their family, and I said, that's for me. I'm going to try it. And so every usually Monday in family worship, I would take Ivan and Sarah, my husband and I, we'll sit with them and say, okay, for worship today, let's plan Sabbath. It's coming in 6 days, or 5 days, I guess, by Monday. And what do you want to do? So there's a little, I think there's a graphic that has it. It says we asked them, what do you want to do on Friday night? And what food do you want to have? And they would say it, and we'd write it in. Well, it could have been chili and cornbread or whatever, fruit salad, whatever. And then what activity you want to do. Most of the time, they wanted to do charades for worship,
Right.
and so.
It was Friday night. You had then Sabbath morning, Sabbath afternoon, and then Sabbath evening.
That's right.
So I love this idea of having this up here, because the children, you actually got the children involved in making preparations, and it seemed like a holiday. It seemed like something that they would be looking forward to, because then you knew that when you were planning this out, when the Sabbath came, it wasn't going to be somebody sitting around saying, what are we going to do?
Yes. Or why do we have to do this?
Yes.
And when's it going to end? Well, if they invented it, they're more inclined to own it and want to and look forward to actually doing it.
And not just for children. I think that's a great idea for all of us, because then if we put some thought into what our Sabbath activities are, especially if you're in ministry.
Yes.
In ministry, we can get so overworked on Sabbath. It's good to carve out some time and say, this is going to be our special time that we're doing.
That's right.
Just for our own relaxation and special time with the Lord.
That's right. And in your preparation, there are different seasons of life for Sabbath keeping. Right now, I spend a lot of time traveling, and weekends are very, very busy. So I have to my Sabbaths are simpler now.
Right.
Simpler preparation. And so you have to gauge whatever your season of life is. But simple can still be special.
Amen.
And it just having that intentionality. It might mean putting a special bowl of fruit you just got from the market on Sabbath, and a nice pretty, or it could mean lighting a candle. It could mean many things, but just something to indicate we're about to have a special time.
Amen.
And we need to be intentional about about welcoming it.
Something that I like is to put scripture promises. If I'm going to have people over for dinner, put scripture promises under their plate. And then after the meal, when the dishes are cleared away, everybody can have that scripture promise for the week. That's their promise from God. And, you know, they can share and say what that means to them or what they might be looking forward to.
Yes.
So.
Well, it takes intentionality, but we plan when we have a vacation or when we have people over for a holiday or whatever, we put some thought into it, and then we can really enjoy it.
But I like what you said, May Ellen, that simple can be special, because I know that there's probably people out there like me and like you who work many hours, they feel like their time is in such a crunch anyway, that sometimes we have almost a stop-and-go Sabbath. It's just kind of like you rush up to the Sabbath hours, and some people just stop, and then they're waiting for the time to click by to where they can go again. Yeah. But if we put a little thought into it, it doesn't have to make our days more hectic. It's actually to make our weekend more special, that vacation day with God more special.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at principle number 2.
Principle number 2, under the vacation idea, is the principle of resting. Resting from work and life's burdens and secular concerns and distractions. Sabbath keeping means that. And again, we're resting, we're putting aside our regular business. If we don't rest from our daily grind, it's like exhaling all the time. And, you know, we can try that, you know. We can try exhaling for the rest of this program and see how well we do. Amen. And not ever taking a time to just inhale and just, oh, Lord, fill me. I just need to be recharged.
You know, that is something that you're taking the words right out of my mouth, is that when I first discovered the Sabbath through personal Bible study and the Lord leading me, I remember my first Sabbaths, just for the first 2 years even, when it would come time, and I was running a ministry out of the home, so I had a little more time, but when it would come time for the Sabbath, I would just feel like I was inhaling the fragrance of God, and it would be such a joyful change of pace. And I think you're probably aware that I think it was France, they tried to change the work week from 7-day work week to 10-day work week, and found that people could not function on a 10-day work week. God's the one who set up the 7-day weekly cycle, because he knew our bodies, our biorhythms, we needed that break. We need that day off. Yeah.
Yes. And they did the same thing in Britain during the World War II. They upped the hours, and they found out that the production went down.
Amen.
And when they allowed more time for them to rest, the production went up.
Amen.
So it's a given. It's a given.
And let me give
for
some
humanity.
of those. Let me give some scriptures if you're taking notes. That there's principle number 2 of resting from your work and your concerns and the burdens of life. Exodus 16:28 through 29, Exodus 29 through 10, Exodus 23:12, 34:21, and there's many more. They're all listed in May Ellen's book. So principle number 3.
Well, principle number 3, as listed in the book, is renewing. Many people may be doing Sabbathy things, but sometimes they do them in a stressful manner. And in fact, one of the strongest findings of my dissertation, I compared church leaders as one of the things I studied with the regular church members, and I found out that the church leaders had a noticeably higher stress level on Sabbath than the church members. And so somehow we've got to come up with a mindset that allows us to do Sabbathy things in an unstressful way. And because if we just are constantly going all Sabbath long and end up more tired than when we started Sabbath, more tired at the end, there's something not right with that picture.
And I can relate to that because we travel a lot on weekends and minister. But then when we are in town often, after church, then there's hospital visitations, and there's sometimes we end up counseling with people. And there are times that we are going all day Sabbath, and you come in at the end of, at the close of Sabbath, when you finally make it home, you're more tired than any other day of the week. So it is something that we're trying to, I was telling a young pastor and his wife, we can't be God. We can't be the end all and the answer for everyone. So we have to learn to pace ourselves and make sure that we've got special time for our family and special time for God.
And there may be one Sabbath when you have a day like that. But if every Sabbath of every month is like that, I have a little schedule I sometimes try to factor in my Sabbath monthly plan this time. But it's in my mind as I think of my month. Maybe one Sabbath could be for a service activity, after church. Maybe another Sabbath could be for a nature activity. Maybe one Sabbath could be just fall apart Sabbath. Just stay home and with your family, and maybe take a rest together, and just have some neutral things that aren't really demanding. But just find yourself again and get reacquainted. And maybe another Sabbath could be, maybe there's a church program or something, But not have every Sabbath this one constant grind, but breaking it up into different types of Sabbaths. Yeah. And you can't follow, and all these 15 principles that we're going to discuss in the course of these 4 programs, we can't do all of them every Sabbath. Amen. I want to give you that little guideline right from the start, although there are some that we must do or wouldn't be Sabbath. Right. But some of them there's a little, you can do it maybe not this Sabbath but next Sabbath. Of course, every Sabbath we need to rest, every Sabbath we need to keep it holy. Those principles we keep intact. But I just wanted to point that out so that you wouldn't end up so tired at the end that it's not a rest and you're not renewed. And
the whole idea of when we think of this as vacation time with the Lord, I mean, there is preparation before we go on a vacation. There is principle number 2 was the resting, and there is resting on a vacation, and there is renewal on a vacation, or else. Well, I've been on vacations that weren't too restful when I'm thinking about it, and I told myself I would never do that again. When you come home and need a vacation from your vacation, you're in trouble, right? Yes. Okay, so let's look at principle number 4. Okay, did I share principle number 3? Maybe I'm the one that jumped. That's okay. Principle number 3. Yeah, principle number 3, the one we've been giving suggestions on how to live, is observing the Sabbath in a manner that renews us physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and socially, because the Sabbath is made for us. Okay, be more specific. Give us some examples. Well, physically, that might mean resting. It may mean taking a nap if you've had a hard week. But, like I say, it's a vacation with God, and He's our guest. So if we kind of sleep the whole day and ignore Him, maybe that's not, we don't do that with our guests. Or it may be a nature walk if you don't get a chance to get out and open and get... It could mean that, yeah. And it could mean, of course, mentally not... And if I'm a pastor or something, maybe I don't do heavy, even though it's Sabbathy work that I do, maybe I don't do heavy sermon preparation or heavy materials preparation, even if it's on a Sabbathy theme, just because of the mental, it won't be a break mentally. And spiritually, of course, is the going to church and hopefully getting renewed that way. And socially, we have maybe a more laid back time with our family, and just in the relaxation mode, trying to avoid talking business and things like that we are taking a break from. And I think I mentioned previously in another. I won't mention his name, but I do know that there's one very popular pastor, evangelist, speaker that is on 3ABN, and I know that he, from Sabbath, as they welcome in the Sabbath, the first thing he does is turn off his phone. Mm-hmm. And he said he figures that if the world can't get a hold of him for 24 hours, it's not going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. And he dedicates the time to his family and their time together with the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this takes, again, intentionality.
Yes.
You know, and it depends on what your profession is too. If you're a musician, you know, a conductor or something, maybe music isn't a way that renews you, or directing choirs on Sabbath. Maybe that's not a renewal thing for you because you're doing it all the time. But for me, being involved in music is a renewal thing because I can't do it during the week. So you have to gauge your situation and try to have balance in your life in this day. Yes, well, we could elaborate on that. Also, we have to, observing the Sabbath in a manner of renewal means it produces a sense of well-being, lowering stress. And so again, if we're more tired and stressful at the end, we need to rethink. Because Jesus is coming.
I don't want to, well, we need to go on. So let's get to principle number 4.
Principle number 4 is healing, observing the day to foster healing, relief, release, liberation, and refreshment. And any action that hurts oneself or others is Sabbath breaking.
That's an interesting thought. So explain what you mean when you say observe the day by fostering healing. Give us some examples.
Well, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and in the book it lists the references for the 7 healing miracles that Jesus did. I think deliberately, most of them, to make the point that Sabbath is a day for healing.
Amen.
And you know, the man with the withered hand, the lady that was stumped over, Simon's mother, and the pool of Bethesda, and all these healing stories took place on Sabbath. And I took that as a principle. Wow, everything I do on Sabbath has to be healing. If I'm going to be judgmental and tearing people down, it's not healing.
That's good.
It translates into that. That could be an example.
Of course, we shouldn't be judgmental or tearing people down.
Yes,
on
any day. And the Sabbath is a day above all
days.
So, as we definitely should not turn the Sabbath into an occasion for doing.
But maybe, you know, specifically, you might apply that with parents, that if you have problem children, maybe the time to deal with problems is not on the Sabbath day. Maybe that's the time for just affirmation and building them up and try to heal and
heal relationships
and have that relationship.
Yes, one family actually decided to do that, unless it was something that couldn't wait. They waited so that Sabbath could be associated in a positive light, you know, in their children's lives, and a healing. And of course, healing involves, you know, could mean going to take care of somebody or visit the sick or anything that's, and you know, when we have a situation, if it's an emergency that comes up, we can ask ourselves, will greater harm come if I leave this undone than if I do it, you know, and that's, and you know, that's another issue entirely, but I suppose we better move on to number 5.
Okay, number 5.
Yes, principle number 5, celebrating. Now, this celebrating the creation of the world and our redemption and the atmosphere should be one of celebration, joy, and delight. And
I love it, May Ellen, because when I first began celebrating the Sabbath, and I would go out to people and I would tell them I was celebrating the Sabbath. Now, I have to tell you, some Sabbath keepers, and I call them that, and I don't mean to sound, but that's what they were doing, was keeping the Sabbath, but they weren't making it anything joyful. And sometimes people would get upset with me and say, you shouldn't be celebrating the Sabbath. And I said, it's all about creation, recreation, sanctification. Why shouldn't I be celebrating the Sabbath? I think it is a joyous occasion.
Yeah, you know, the 4th commandment does not say, remember the Sabbath day to keep it gloomy.
Yeah.
Abraham Joshua Heschel, who has written a wonderful book on the Sabbath, he says that it's actually, in Jewish tradition, it's considered a sin to be sad on the Sabbath day.
Oh, I love that. It's considered a sin to be sad on the Sabbath day.
And then Isaiah 58, of course, that wonderful word delight comes up, and keep the Sabbath as a delight. The Hebrew word for that is, it's oneg, it means exquisite delight. Richard Davidson often talks about it. It's royal delight. It's not just an ordinary delight, and so we're having a vacation with the King. I mean, this is royal delight, And so somehow we've got to, he wants us to experience that.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking this is a whole paradigm shift. People who have looked at the Sabbath as something that they had to do. One program earlier, you said that some people look at the Sabbath as a day that a demanding God has taken from us, rather than looking at it as a day that is a gift from a loving God who wants to spend this time with us. I love the idea that this is 7.5 weeks a year, 52 days out of the year, that God says, come vacation with me, come rest. You'll find your strength, you'll find your confidence when you're resting in me. And let's review those 5 principles again, just recapping those. There's first the idea of vacation. There's preparing, and that's a guiding principle, is that we prepare to spend that time with God. The second one is that the Sabbath is we should observe it in a way that we are renewing, resting was the second. And then the third one was that we're observing it in a way that we are renewing ourselves physically, emotionally, spiritually. Then healing, that principle is that this is a time not only for personal healing, emotional healing, but to reach out to others as Jesus did and heal on the Sabbath, maybe to visit the sick or the infirm, somebody that's shut-ins. And then principle number 5 is celebrating. And we're celebrating, let's talk about that a little bit more. What are we celebrating exactly?
Celebrating the creation of the world. And Proverbs 8 talks about, that's the other creation story. And it talks about God rejoicing in the mankind that he had made. And we're celebrating redemption.
Amen.
And the other portrayal of the Ten Commandments, Deuteronomy 5, talks about that's why we're keeping the Sabbath in that.
You know, my favorite scripture regarding the Sabbath is Exodus 31:13. That God says this day is a memorial to let you know that I'm the one who sanctifies you.
Yes.
And for someone who grew up so performance-oriented, feeling like I had to be perfect to be loved, not only by my family, but by my Lord, it was such a aha moment for me to know that I could inhale and know that God is the one who's going to do this. I can't believe our time's already all gone. May Ellen, thank you so much for being here. And the book is From Sundown to Sundown, How to Keep the Sabbath and Enjoy It. And the author is May Ellen Cologne, and we are so delighted that you've been with us.
Nice to be here.
And we're going to have her come back, right? You're going to come back and finish off some of these principles. Well, we've run through these very quickly, but I think you really would enjoy this book. It can be at the ABC or at Amazon.com. And learn how to come away and rest in the Lord to really enjoy a vacation with God.